feeling triggered, I think that's a really good indication and a sign to say, well, actually, there's one of your parts here of myself that need fixing. So rather than if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So if you keep repeating these same patterns and you're feeling triggered, which is causing an emotional reaction, that's where the work is. And so rather than kind of feeling victim to all the external world and everyone around you and saying they're bringing me a bad feeling, actually take the power back and take responsibility to say, well, actually, yeah, this has happened. And it's not the circumstance or the person itself, but it's the feeling that I need to be with.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James, and today I've got a very special guest sat opposite me. It's a gentleman I've been trying to get on the podcast for about a year and a half, and it's someone I've been hearing about through the grapevine. You've got to speak to Nathan. You've got to speak to Nathan. So I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast today Mr. Nathan Arnold, who is a speaker, therapist, and mentor. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're having a great chat off air. Like I said, really looking forward to chatting with you today. I know you can add a lot of value to my audience. But one thing that I like to do is basically sort of take my audience back to where it kind of all started with my guests. And I know that that's a real pivotal part of where we're going today anyway, to talk about childhood. So can you just sort of take my audience back and paint a picture for what life was like for you growing up?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a family where there was me, my mum, my nan and my sister. My father was absent. I didn't go on to meet my father till I was 20. So within that, I experienced some things like with my mother, where I felt quite unsafe. Life was unpredictable. She was in some abusive relationships. And of course, at a young age, when I didn't feel safe, I then was kind of operating from a dysregulated nervous system for a very young age. Of course, at the time, I didn't know this, but over the work that I've done over the years, and to connect the dots going backwards, it was evident that there was some things and the way that childhood played out, which brought me kind of this unsettled kind of life growing up. So within that as well, there was a really rough environment where there'd be like electricity used to cut off, the candles come on. That was kind of a recurring theme. And I thought everyone was living like that until I went to my friend's birthday party, 7th birthday party, where I realised that people aren't living how we're living. And so it kind of came from lack and limitation also. And my mother suffered from depression. She was on welfare from as long as I can remember. And she also was addicted to alcohol as well. So I realised from an early age that this feeling of like having my needs met and feeling safe was something that wasn't kind of present as a child. And that kind of led to all kinds of different behaviours growing up.
Let's not take that back a bit. So when it comes to your mum, did you have any awareness as a child that your mum was struggling mentally? Was that something you were aware of? Is it something that's only now looking back that you could see the signs? Or was it a case of mum's not okay? Like, because I know you sort of mentioned like living with your grandma and stuff. Like, did your grandma ever sort of tell you that your mum wasn't okay? Was there any sort of signs, or was it just a case of now looking back you noticed it?
Yeah, there was all kind of behaviours. My mother, she, on one hand, we used to, I felt loved. There was a lot of times, a lot of good times, a lot of good memories, but it was too unpredictable, and there'd be often at times where, you know, because of the result of the depression and intake of alcohol, that would then play out through her behaviours. So it was quite evident that there was something not quite right. There was kind of different guys that was involved throughout my childhood, and again, just not feeling safe around that suggests that, yeah, there was something that was playing out for my mother. I didn't know what at the age.
Were you aware? I've heard this before from the podcasts I've listened to and guests I've had on, where you didn't really know what mum you were coming back to, like with the alcohol and stuff. Was it like a behaviour up and down? Like, I'm not sure if there's any question, but it was like as a child, that inability to know that actually when you went home it would be a safe space. Was that something that was evident with your dynamic with your mum as well?
Yeah, definitely. That unpredictability. So it was really hard to have that consistency, my needs being met, and it would be the subtle little things, but it could have been an accumulation of like 1,000 subtle things that led to those feelings of unsafe.
And what do you think played an impact with your dad not being there as well? Like looking back, like not having that strong male role model, like how do you think that affected you growing up? Because obviously you had your grandma there as well, so essentially you had like two parents, but obviously they're both women. And the reason why I say that is because when I go into schools, I'm not sure if you noticed this as well, but you tend to have a lot of the boys that are struggling, it's because they don't have that strong male role model. Is that something that you think affected you, or actually do you think that your mum managed to play both roles effectively? And can a mum play both roles effectively, do you think?
Yes, I think that my mother tried to also step into her masculine and to make sure that I was kind of supported in the best way possible when it come to like my football or school, how to deal with situations like bullies or fighting and things like that. But I think with my dad, I think the feelings that come up was rejection, judgment, and also kind of abandonment. And so how that played out with my father is that I developed what I call a reactive autonomy. So it was kind of like I wanted to be the breadwinner, I wanted to step up, wanted to get my mum and nan out of certain situations, and there was quite a lot of good attributes and that what stemmed from that, especially with my assertiveness, my resilience that I built, the mental strength and the mental toughness when it comes to sport. But in terms of, again, just our primary state, so the basic needs is feeling seen, known and understood. And so with my father, there was a lot of identity crisis in that, and it used to play out at school where I would try and fit in a lot of the time. I'd sag my pants, try and fit in with a group of guys on one side of the playground. Unsuccessful, I'd go to the other side, and then I'd go home and be a completely different person around the dinner table. So identity crisis, I used to straighten my curls as well, because I didn't know my Jamaican side of the family. So there was a lot of unanswered questions, and something that it wasn't, I just, those feelings of kind of abandonment, rejection played out in me seeking approval in others. You know, I was looking for validation, I was looking for that, to be acknowledged, and to try and figure out who I was through all of that.
That's really interesting, because I think you can go one or two ways in that situation, and clearly for you it worked out very well in sense of that drive to kind of prove yourself. Then in the footballing career it worked really, really well. Whereas I think a lot of other people, it can, if they don't have that positive like output, it can actually go down the other side where you also mentioned like sagging your pants and stuff. You can get with the wrong crowd because you kind of want that validation and approval. You end up doing things that aren't exactly legal, and then before you know it, like you're 20 years old, 30 years old, and you're not living the life that you want to. For me, looking back at this, I just want to sort of like just dive in things there you said about needs, because again, people listening to this, obviously we know as adults we've got needs, but looking back at a young age, so anyone sort of listening to this has got kids and stuff. How can we nurture this in kids? Like what did you need at that time? So looking back, let's say people listen to this and they're single parents, and again, they've got no real interest in dating or bringing a man into a child's life. How can a single parent or a mum, or vice versa, a dad with a mum, how can we nurture these needs that kids have? Because for me, I didn't, this is why I want to have this conversation with you, because when we had this conversation about where you want to take this conversation, I haven't really spoke about this in terms of childhood. And obviously the stuff you've gone through, you're the perfect person to talk on this subject. But I know from an adult point of view, but I don't really know from a child's point of view. So can you sort of talk to me about how do we get these needs met in an environment that maybe not be conducive for that?
Yeah, sure. So when I talk about unmet needs, I've mentioned like feeling unsafe, our autonomic nervous system. So with our nervous system, when we feel unsafe, our nervous system is an amazing system. We all have one, but they all function differently. And so when we don't feel safe with a person, then we basically go to the island where we feel safe. And over the years, we collect all this data, all this evidence of what kept us safe. So as much as we see like our nervous system, we have a battle with it. We kind of like, when it comes to anxiety, fear, worry, and we have a dysregulated nervous system, we don't get that on side. We don't know about it. We're not educated on that. When I look back at my mother, although I felt those things, there's deep compassion there as well, because there's an understanding that actually who was there for her as a little girl to keep her safe or to regulate her when she was younger. And so although it doesn't make your feelings invalid, doesn't make it okay what you went through as a child, it allows you to adopt their pair of eyes and to say, well, actually, when they was growing up and they didn't meet my needs, what needs was what needs did they have when they was younger that wasn't being met either. And I think when we start there and we learn how to regulate ourselves, especially as a parent, I look at it and think, how can I regulate my children? Like sometimes I have my second youngest Birdie, she will come up to me and say, like today I've been out all day, I'll go home and I'll just need 5 minutes to exhale and just have my time. And I've done it before where she'll come and jump on me. You know, she hasn't seen Dad. She's the main character in her story, in her world. And so she doesn't understand that Dad has needs as well. She just wants the outcome to be where I meet her needs. So she'll jump on me and I'll say, darling, just give me 5 minutes. Just give me space, just to, and I'll play in 5 minutes. In that moment is rejection for her. So you imagine all the times, and that's unintentional as a father. But you think of all those subtle times, those little moments growing up that we do unconsciously as parents that can have an impact on the children. And so I'm aware of that. And going back to your question, I think the more that we can regulate ourselves, then we can then co-regulate. And also I think it's being able to be present. I think that's the main thing. A lot of the time, I think 95% of the time we operate from our unconscious mind. So the more present we can be, the more conscious we are around our decisions and choices, and that we can actually meet the needs of our children. And I think that's a massive thing that we need to improve on.
I love what we said there as well about just taking a step back and looking at your parents and saying, well, what have they gone through? And again, it doesn't excuse any of the potential situations and stuff you've gone through. You're not making excuses, but I think it then just softens it a little bit for you. Like rather than just going with such a harsh, especially if your parents are still around. Again, I've been guilty of this as well, where you basically look at some of the stuff and you almost hold anger. But then when you actually just go back and be like, well, they were operating with the best of their ability. Like that's what their thing was. And especially now when I look back and I look at how hard my dad must have been working to support 4 of us. And I know how tired I can get. As you mentioned, you come in from a busy day's work. My dad had then 4 kids wanting his attention. Well, that was never going to happen. He was tired. He had his own needs. And again, it's just looking back at it and realising actually whatever your parents went through, they were doing the best of what they had at that time. It just sort of just softens it a little bit. And I don't think people take that lens. How old were you when your mum passed away, if you don't mind me asking?
I was 27, so it was in 2015.
How far on your journey were you at that point, like with where you are now? Had you even started your journey? This is a completely off the cuff question here. You don't have to answer, but is there anything that you would say to your mum if she was here now, knowing all the stuff that you know about your childhood and what she was going through? Because as you sort of mentioned there, that sort of softly approach. Yeah. I imagine now you've got a completely different lens on it. Is there anything that you would sort of say in that moment? Because I think someone might need to actually hear that right now.
Yeah, I think that I would probably offer her safety and look to regulate her nervous system, because the saddest part is she's probably lived her whole life, never felt safe, and probably never had a regulated nervous system. And I keep talking about that because it's so important, because with a dysregulated nervous system, we then, through our beliefs, our values, our behavior, we operate a lot of the time through hypertension, on high alert, with a dysregulated nervous system. So I think just offering her that and providing her that, and also probably to have a conversation and to tell her that, because I don't know whether she carried a lot of guilt for what happened, even though she couldn't articulate what was playing out for her as a mother. And a lot of the time as well, and I mentioned it in a post recently, but when we look at kind of guilt, there's 2 sides to guilt as well. There's guilt throwers and guilt catchers, and guilt throwers tend to be people who move goalposts, or they kind of change subject. And a lot of the time in my household growing up, people was emotionally unavailable because they didn't know how to articulate the way that was feeling. Also coming from an area where it wasn't spoken about. And also they're not feeling safe enough to go there because they've got a dysregulated nervous system. So I think it's to hold the space to have that conversation. I think that's the most important thing, really, because like I said, I think that there was a lot of denial in there. And I seen that as rejection, not being acknowledged, not being celebrated, not being supported, not being assisted, when really understanding, like you say, just adopting their lens gives you a fresh perspective on the whole thing.
So how does that then affect adult life? Because fundamentally, as adults, we're conditioned as kids. Like, so the way that's sort of described is really like fertile soil, and basically the environment that we grow up in, parents, school, teachers, friends, whatever it is, they just plant all the seeds, and then as adults, we're kind of just sowing, like reaping the harvest that we've sort of sown. So what kind of impact does our childhood have then on our behaviours and our thoughts as an adult? Because for me, this is why I'm so passionate about talking in schools. I look back at my own personal story, and secondary school was a time for me where a lot of turbulence occurred. A lot of the negative voices in my head, I started to become aware of them, didn't know what they were. The negative self-talk that I was then perpetuating on myself. Like, you have one bad comment and then you end up bullying yourself the rest of your life and not really realising it. But let's just take it back a step further. When you really don't have that conscious ability to think, what kind of impact does that actually then have? Like, what have you seen from your experience working with clients and stuff, and again, your own personal experience of these things that were happening on such an unconscious level for you growing up? How does that then impact you as an adult, like your ability to think, behave and act?
Yeah, it comes through different behaviours. Say for one example, I always go back to the scene in Matilda where she comes in from school. She's just been to school. She's had a great day. Mum's twiddling with her hair on the phone to her other employed friend and unemployed friend. And Matilda goes up to her and she talks about Miss Honey, this great teacher that she's had. And she just dismisses it completely. She's on the phone. She's busy. She rejects her in that moment. And so, like you said, when you talk about the internal dialogue that you have, the negative self-talk, all of that stuff, it's kind of like plays out in relationships. You can play out the relationship with yourself, not just other people, but then also it's kind of, again, going back to those primary states, wanting to feel seen, known and understood. And so it can play out in all kind of ways with, yes, there's attachment styles and that, how that plays out in relationships as well. But when it comes to like those subtle things about being rejected, not being acknowledged, not being seen, not feeling heard, it plays out through your behaviors. So I think when I go back to childhood and look at how we experience, not everybody, but how majority of people experiencing, just going off clients as a reference point, is that from 0 to 7 is called the hypnosis stage. So that's where we're being programmed. So through external influences. So we look at family upbringing, we look at TV, music, social media nowadays, not so much when I was younger. But you look at social friends, peers, all these people, all these things have a massive influence on the way that our early beliefs are, and also our behaviours and our values. And so when we're operating between 0 to 7, everything through our 5 sense receptors, sight, sound, touch, taste and smell, we're reading the environment we're in. And I think the law states that anything that plays out whilst we're having an experience, whilst we're in an emotional, intense state, then gets hardwired in. So it gets conditioned in, basically. So, for example, you could be driving along now, you hear a piece of music, and that piece of music will then take you back to a memory that you had. So that could be a pleasant memory, that could be a really happy song to you, or it could be bring an emotional reaction to you, and it could be a sad feeling that you get. And that's because it was conditioned in at a certain time in the past. And so we're operating unconsciously, going by life just with our relationships, with our friendships, with our partnerships, and we're behaving or operating a certain way, and we don't really link and connect it back to all these times that have happened in the past where your nervous system in that moment just wants to keep you safe. So if you're a 3-year-old or you're Matilda at a young age and you're getting rejected from your mother, and then you're in a relationship and a guy cheats on you or a girl cheats on you and you have that rejection, the nervous system's got the data, got the evidence of what it did in the past to keep you safe, it'll do it again. And so when people say, oh, you're childish or you're acting childish in terms of like a conflict or anything like that, it's because your nervous system, the very first time that happened, you as a child. And so all those tendencies come back. And so your nervous system is just operating in order to keep you safe. That's all its job is. And so when I look back at kind of that time where we're programmed and conditioned, what I see with my clients is that it is just a situation they're dealing with right now, but your nervous system will respond to any situation exactly the same.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like, until we become aware of this stuff, I think it's Philip that taught me this, is that basically until you're aware of it, you can't do anything about it. Yeah. We're just sort of stuck on past behaviours, as you mentioned, and just repeating same patterns. I think it's interesting listening to this as well. If you look back at past relationships, I know that I was guilty of this, that basically I was all different women, but it was the same kind of person, the same kind of patterns, and I was the common problem. Again, looking at jobs, if you've had 5 jobs in the last 5 years, you're the common denominator, and actually what tends to happen is probably you don't do well with your boss telling you to do something, you respond in a certain way, maybe you're gossiping, whatever happens, and that's left you to leave the job. And it's just understanding that we're just living on, most time, like 95% autopilot. And until you're stopping and actually asking yourself, is this autopilot serving me? If the answer is no, you've got to do something about it. And I think that's what I'm going to talk about in a second, like how do we actually do that? Because for me, it's interesting. I went to a school, so this, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before or not, but I went talking to a school. There's a girl there, I think she must have been 14, 15, and she was basically stood out in the crowd, like, this wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, like proper like moody kid. And then by the end of this workshop I'd done, she'd really opened up and was asking those inquisitive questions, and I thought, that's interesting. The school then asked me to go back again. I said, I'll only go back if I can speak to this girl again on a one-to-one basis, or if there was a teacher there. And some stuff happened, really traumatic stuff that she'd witnessed with her mum, really, really bad stuff. And she hadn't spoken to anyone about it before. She started to open up with me, and essentially what's happened at school, she was acting out really, really aggressive, and they couldn't figure out why. And one day she saw this thing happening, and she went absolutely nuts. And then it stopped. And I said, so do you know when things are happening at school and you feel out of control, is that your way of getting back in control? And she went, I never thought about that. And again, as a kid at that age, I've been conditioned, actually, if I do this, if I scream, I shout, if I throw things, it will stop. Yeah. So that's just her way of getting back control. That's essentially what you're saying here, isn't it? Like, we've got our body wants to be in homeostasis. And actually from childhood, as an adult, if things don't go quite right, we've got this folder to be like, oh, we need to go back to homeostasis, do this. And it may then mean we get aggressive, because that was me. I was a very aggressive person growing up, and I had a lot of anger. I think a lot of men tend to, stereotypically. But it's like, you've got a way of dealing with these things, and until you realise it probably comes up from childhood, you can't do anything about it. Is that something that you sort of notice with it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to, again, being a dad. If I'm sat there and I'm not being present, and I'm on social media, I've got to get content out, I've got a business to run, etc., etc. My little one's pattern is that she will misbehave in order to get my attention, because when she misbehaves, I put the phone down. I go to her, and I then I'm trying to be conscious to meet her needs and obviously be present with her and regulate her. But unconscious me would be, she's being naughty, she's being disruptive. But all her outcome is in that moment is to get my attention, which she's got. She's got my attention. Never mind how I react to that situation, she's got my attention. That's all she wants. So when you're saying about like kind of it plays out in behaviors, and like you said before, in relationships and things, it's because you're so used to getting the outcomes that you want through certain ways. And so if it's attention that you want, it's approval, if you want somebody to notice and acknowledge you, then of course you're going to behave a certain way. And that goes back again to this data that you've got of what's been effective. There's evidence there of how your nervous system's been able to get that.
So if someone's listening to this and like, right, Nathan, I noticed I've got some rubber patterns that are coming up. Like you just mentioned, like maybe with women or men, they're going for the same kind of men all the time, or same kind of jobs, and they just keep leaving it. They don't have any consistency, and all the evidence in their life is pointing that things aren't quite right. And I've just listened to what you just said, and they're like, right, something unconscious is happening from my childhood. How do you kind of go about unprogramming yourself? How do you like decondition yourself? And again, I know it's a very long drawn out process, so I'm not expecting you to give me the whole blueprint in a podcast, but for someone listening to this, like, how can they go about first trying to identify these like patterns and programs that they've got? Because you can't do anything, as we mentioned, until you become consciously aware of them. So how do people go about getting that awareness?
I think again, probably the recent post that I put out about feeling triggered, I think that's a really good indication and a sign to say, well, actually there's honey or parts here of myself that need fixing. So rather than if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So if you keep repeating these same patterns and you're feeling triggered, which is causing an emotional reaction, that's where the work is. And so rather than kind of feeling victim to all the external world and everyone around you and saying they're bringing me a bad feeling, actually take the power back and take responsibility to say, well, actually, this has happened, and it's not the circumstance or the person itself, but it's the feeling that I need to be with. Like, why am I reacting that way? What is this? What's coming up for me? And if you play that game and you start to be reflective and you start to understand, naturally, there's two types of people. There's thrill seekers or pain avoiders. And if you're a pain avoider, that's why change don't happen, because you want to avoid the pain. And it's really uncomfortable to change your behavior. And also as well, your nervous system, if you react a certain way, and just to give you an example, in my relationship with Kaylee, before, and I'm doing the work now, but before, if we was to have an argument, I would get in my car and I want to drive to New Zealand and probably see her in 3 years' time to come back and deal with the situation. You know, I didn't want to deal with this situation. But that was my nervous system again, taking me back to the island where I know I'm safe, right? Because when we're young, we can't regulate ourselves. We need the big people to regulate us. So if we didn't have that, then our systems are incredible in order to do that for us. So my defense mechanism in the relationship when there's conflict is an avoidance style. I would avoid the situation. Now, what happens if Kaylee's then needing me to make her feel safe in that moment? And I then check out, I leave, then we've got two dysregulated individuals. So in that moment, to be conscious of that, understanding what my behavior is, what's coming up for me, in that moment, I don't feel like my needs are being met or I'm being triggered by something that's obviously a wound. In that moment, if I can start to do the work and recognize my behaviors and those patterns, I can then maybe say to my partner, well, actually, look, I'm still going to leave. I need 10, 15 minutes, or I might need an hour or two. I love you. And when I come back, we're going to confront this and we're going to deal with it. But right now, I need to process what's happened. But I'm coming back. And it's that conversation there, which is co-regulation. So I'm regulating her without even physically, rubbing her back, holding her hand or anything like that, but verbally making her feel safe in that moment to say, well, actually, yeah, he's leaving, but he's coming back. And that's really vitally important for partnerships. And so, like I said, when you are kind of looking at those patterns and kind of breaking those cycles, it's first regulating yourself. I think that's really important, but then also understanding as well, like if you are in a relationship, like what is the dynamic and what are those triggers, what come up? Because that's the thing that you need to deal with, is those triggers that come up. And so rather than reacting to everything around you and being victim to everything that plays out, to always come back to yourself and say to yourself, look, this is playing out for me. Why is this playing out for me? And asking those questions where it's like, right, okay, again, if you've always done what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So what haven't I done yet? And it's, and yes, on a deeper level, there's things like changing the neural pathways. So a lot of the time on the programs at the prison, when I was running 6-week mentorship programs, I get the guys to brush their teeth with the opposite hand and do things differently. And so it's just changing what they're doing. And even if it's just small like that, just changing what they're so used to and familiar with and breaking that pattern. So yeah, there's a lot of work that goes in with it, but I think it's just a case of making sure firstly that you regulate yourself. Because I think often at times when, especially with caregivers, we're so fixated on, we want them to meet our needs and they might not ever meet our needs. So you have to heal from within. And by having those times where you can regulate yourself, then that's the starting point, and then that's when you can start to change and make those. Because when I look back at, as well as when I look back at my mother, she wasn't the active operator of her nervous system. And what I mean by that is, because no one's ever regulated her nervous system, she could be operating from a nervous system from her granddad, and it could have been handed down. If there was a trauma in your family years ago, that trauma could be passed down and handed down. So like I could be operating from a nervous system that's not even, to do with me. So who's the active operator of the nervous system as well? And so when you regulate yourself, you become the active operator of your nervous system. That's how you break the cycle. That's how then you can pass on to your children for future generations of actually regulation.
You break the chain, don't you? So just to summarize, because you've literally touched on so many golden points there. So I want to kind of summarize what you're saying. Essentially, especially in relationships where people can relate to this, whether it's a intimate relationship or friendship or relationship with someone at work, is that if something's happened and someone's triggering you, that is basically saying that there's someone has triggered you. You basically triggered yourself. Is essentially what's happened. Like you've used a word and it's just a word. I've then internalized that to mean something. So basically, when someone says something to you, it's then rather than just reacting straight away, which is the natural default setting, and in an intimate relationship, it's normally an argument. You then trigger the other person, who then shouts back. It's a back and forth. No one wins. Hurtful things get said. No one feels safe. Hurtful things get said. So the trust is gone. Well, I told this person my deepest, darkest secret, and in the heat of the moment, they're just throwing it back at me. So what you're saying is, when this happens and you're feeling that way, just take a second to pause. Understand that you've got to go and figure out why this word, terminology, phrase has triggered you, and then come back and then explain that in a constructive manner without emotions to actually resolve the issue. Is that fundamentally what we're saying there?
Yeah, but there's an important point to make. So you can read the books, you can go on courses, you can have all the information, the intellect, the knowledge, everything. In that moment, though, you're not driving. You're not driving. Your autonomic nervous system's taking the wheel, because it's like, Nath, in this moment, I need to get you out of here. I need to keep you safe. I know what to do.
It's default, isn't it? It's instant. You don't have time to really think. Yeah.
So it's not. So say when we're talking primitive here. So me and you, Daniel, we're walking. We're talking kind of hunter gathering. We're foraging. Tiger comes out the bush, and I say to you, and we'll probably touch on this and how it kind of works with the processes and everything like that, regards to our brain, what happens in that moment of fight or flight. But say, for example, the tiger's 50 feet away, and I say to you, oh, by the way, and I'm coming from logic here and knowledge, and I say, oh, let's just meditate a minute. Let's just regulate ourselves. But the tiger's coming. It's not a really good plan. Yeah. Our nervous system knows what to do in order to keep us safe in that moment. So that's why it's so important to regulate your nervous system, because once you can start to take the wheel and then you navigate your way consciously through those situations, that's how you can create change within relationships and the way that you show up.
And it's a practice as well, isn't it? Because I imagine you're very much like me. Like, we're on this path, and we've spoken about this off air. We're not perfect. And I'm sure that sometimes you don't shower yourself in glory. I certainly don't shower myself in glory sometimes. And sometimes it's the worst part, because you know better, and you know that you know better. So after when you're reflecting, thinking, I didn't handle that very well, but you know how you could have done it better. So I think the reason I'm saying that is for people listening, like, just because you understand some information, as you said, you're hearing it, you're then reading it, you're going to do your own research after this episode, that you're not going to be perfect at it, because especially if for 30 years of your life, you've been going one direction, you can't expect in a day, a week, even a year to undo 30 years worth of conditioning. I think that's really important to understand, because people beat themselves up when they go back to their default setting. And then people are like, oh, but I thought you were this. Oh, you meant to be this or happy, chilled out person. Like, why are you responding like that? And then we can then beat ourselves up, and it goes down another thing of shame, guilt, all this sort of stuff. So how do you handle that with clients? Because it's something I always talk about. Of like, you will have moments where you fall off the metaphorical bandwagon. Like, you're going to mess up, you're going to make mistakes. That's all part of life. And obviously my whole thing is, if you're reflecting on it, I've got a little formula: pain plus reflection equals progress. Like, when we mess up, we like to sit in the pain. You mentioned, we're the victim, and we like to beat ourselves up. I'm such a loser, failure. It's like, right, once you reflect, that failure becomes a lesson, you can then move on. Is there any way that you sort of teach clients through that? Because I think it's a valuable part that gets missed. We almost expect people to, well, you've heard it. Yeah. You've gone on this course. Session. Yeah, you've gone on this course. Why don't you get it? Like, so can we talk about that? And again, we'll talk about the nervous system if you want to as well. But like, why is that? There's a loaded question here, but so let's just start with the first part. Like, so how do you get people to navigate the inevitable, which is you are going to mess up?
Well, it's the game of life, isn't it? Life's one big lesson. So you will have a moment, you'll have something that comes to test, to put your tools that you've learned or the knowledge to the test. So you're always going to have moments where you're going to be able to test yourself in situations like that. So it's just important just to show yourself self-compassion and know that you're on a journey towards that. And I think you've mentioned it there, that despite not kind of catching it in the moment and making better choices, that self-reflection is really important too. The reflection part allows you to, again, have that learning experience and then learn from it the next time round. But we're talking about years and years of hardwiring and unraveling of the way that you've always operated from your default. So it is just showing yourself self-compassion and patience, and be gentle with yourself to say, look, this is going to take time, but as long as you keep doing the work, it's like a muscle. If you go to the gym and keep lifting the dumbbell, the bicep's going to get bigger. And so it's about going on that journey of just healing, identifying those on your parts of yourself, and then being gentle, patient, knowing that it's going to take a little bit of time to grasp.
I see it's like a computer game. For me, it's like you're playing a computer game, like a game of Mario, for example, and at the end of every level, there's a boss. And that's like your little test. And sometimes you'll beat the boss and you go up to the next level. That then doesn't mean that you're done. You're then going to face another boss, but you're better equipped. And again, you may lose, but then you don't just go and start from level 1 again. Like you just start from that level you're currently at, and you sort of learn, and then you carry on going. So I love what you said there. Also with this, do you ever get clients to sort of journal as well? So for that self-reflection, because that's something that has helped out massively for me, like that reflecting on myself, because sometimes it's really hard to think inside our own heads, because it can be a very messy place in there. And you can start off trying to be analytical. A bad thing's happened, a bad situation, we've messed up, and we can try and come at it from a place of compassion and love. But very quickly, if we're not catching ourselves, it can go into a negative thought spiral. So is there sort of tips and tricks that you get for clients on this sort of self-reflection of when they do mess up or things don't quite go right, they haven't showered themselves in glory, let's say? Is there tips and tricks that you use of like maybe talking to somebody or journaling, or is there anything like that that you sort of use to help people reflect on this so they can actually then keep making progress?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, journaling's a big one, but there's so many tools. I see it as like if you've got a device and you need to clean up space, right? So you've hardly got any space left on your phone. You need to clean it. So it's sometimes like, a week, every 2 weeks, you need that to process thoughts, or to just, you're taking on so much energy. Sometimes as well, if there's conflicting situations, you're taking on other people's energy. You need to be able to have the tools to then reset. And so journaling's a big one. I had a client who is basically, again, living in here and really understands what's going on, really self-aware, got really good emotional intelligence, but just needs to process that and filter it out. And so journaling becomes a really effective tool for that, because once you get it down on paper, it's out of your head. It's like having all these tabs open on a computer. You have too many, it's just overwhelming. So sometimes we just need to, and again, it's like you landing on the runway as well, and there's like, and the runway isn't clear, you can't land. So we have to keep, and it's continuous active practice. And I think also as well, when it comes to like personal development, people who are choosing to lead a better life and to more fulfilled life, and you are going to have more challenges, because if you're someone who's just drifting by life and you stay in your comfort zone, that's fine, right? You just operate from your nervous system how you always have been. You have the same relationships, same outcomes, same experiences.
You know what to expect.
Exactly. It's predictable.
Yep.
It's predictable. So that's why a lot of people stay in their comfort zone, because they know what the future looks like. If you are somebody that is taking that step to live a life where you're taking life on effectively, like you said, it's like the boss, isn't it? At the end of the level, you are going to have times where it's going to test you in order to get to that next level of consciousness. So yeah, journaling, there's loads of different tools to use, but journaling is effective because say for example as well, like go back to the course that I did in the prison. I had a guy who was just in revenge. He was just stuck in revenge, and there was a situation that happened. What led him in jail was that he was a part of like a gang. There's a massive gang culture, and I got him to work through forgiveness. And so he was saying, well, I'm never going to see that person again. So one, I can't forgive him, and I'm not going to. That's a choice. And I said, but forgiveness is a gift that you give to yourself. It's something that you can do internally. Isn't the fact that you need to meet this person again and physically go through that process. He said, what do you mean? So I then got him to visualize this person. So I took him inside his mind and said, right, okay. But first I had to regulate him, because if he wasn't regulated, then he'd been triggered just by the sight of his face.
So we're going to talk about this nervous system in a second. But so when you say you had to regulate him, you basically get him into a calm, relaxed space that we're talking
state,
about.
Yeah, a calm state where when he was ready. And this took probably 4 or 5 weeks towards the end of the course. But he then had to go and meet this person inside his head and then forgive him. And so that was a really powerful tool, because although it wasn't real, your subconscious mind don't know what's real or imagined. Mm-hmm. So when we took him back in his mind, he internally was doing the work there, and it didn't need the other person. So, and this might play out if you've got a parent who's narcissistic, if you've got, again, looking at guilt throwers, and say they're always changing subject, or they're not emotionally available, you want to iron something out with a family member or somebody or a friend, and they're just not meeting you where you want them to. It's making sure that you can do the work without them. It's that's the internal work, is being able to reframe things differently for yourself, and you don't need the other person to participate.
It's also a big thing as well to forgive yourself. So that guy there had to a lot of forgiveness for, again, take responsibility for him ending up there in the first place. It's very easy to blame someone. Like I literally, I learned on Mikey's podcast where her ex-girlfriend of mine tried to kill me. I told this story hundreds of times. Again, to anyone who would listen. Like, didn't really talk about it publicly, but anyone would listen. Like, and I was the victim. This happened. And it was only on Mikey's podcast where I told the story. And at the end of it, I went, I'm not actually sure how much that story is factually true. The facts are, there was a knife to my throat, the police got called, she ended up in jail. But all the other stuff I've said, I can't actually remember. And the thing with that is I had to like just replay that a bit, and again, going back in there and like replay in my mind. But the thing was, it was that forgiveness of myself to be like, I've basically been lying to myself this entire time and basically making myself the victim and get myself worked up. I think a lot of people know, whether they're in jail or relationships ended or whatever it is, it's very easy to blame other people. Is this person's fault? Was this person's fault? But actually, if you can just take that step back and take responsibility, no matter how small it is, and just be like, right, I need to forgive myself for the part that I played in this. It just gives you your power back. And as you mentioned, I wrote it down and then you literally said it, like the brain does no difference between thought and reality. So it just allows you, even if the person potentially isn't here anymore, you can actually have that conversation, and it just completely changes your perception of that whole incident, which then means you can then go on living your life without this thing kind of like holding you back. I think it's such a powerful tool that people don't really utilize.
No, it's like with grief as well. There's like five. There's like an acronym with 5 words, DABDA. So it's like D is like denial. So the first stage is like denial. No, that's happened. A stands for anger. So a lot of times you'll process anger. And grief, by the way, isn't just you've lost somebody, they're no longer here. Grief could be a long-term friendship, or a relative, a family member, and there's been a breakdown in that relationship. Or it could be a version of yourself that you're letting go of,
I had to learn this the hard way. Remember that spiritual lady I had on? So I basically lost a job. I'd removed myself and my company from the gym I was at. And this spiritual lady came on podcast. I'll put it up in the show notes so you can see what episode it is. And I was not okay at this time. I didn't realise how bad I wasn't. And again, I had this awareness of stuff. I didn't realise how bad I was. And this lady at the end of the podcast basically said, "You're grieving." I went, "Yeah, but no one's died." And she went, No. Like, you don't, cause I'd never heard this before. I thought, well, you only grieve for something. She went, No, you're grieving the loss of an idea and identity and all this stuff. And that's exactly what it was. Like, I had this vision of where my life was going in this direction, and it was just taken away from me. I had chosen to do it. And I was also holding on to that guilt as well, that I'd chosen this. And I couldn't really, and I was wow. And she just, from the screen, she went, "You're not sleeping. This is why." And I went, what the hell? It is the most surreal moment in my life. But I think it's important that I just wanted to sort of validate what you're saying there in the sense of it's not just the loss of someone. It could be this idea, this again with a partner, like you knew the person wasn't good for you, but actually you had this vision of getting married and kids, whatever it is, or a job, whatever it is, it made it redundant. And it's that whole thing, like, more resist persist. And the more we kind of, but this shouldn't have happened, you're just giving more energy to it and you're feeding it and it's making yourself feel worse and worse and worse. Yeah,
absolutely. So going back to the acronym, so the first one is denial, second one's anger, third one, B, is bargaining. So you go through a phase where you're kind of like, you're wanting to get that situation or person back, and so you're kind of coming to terms with that new reality. Then D, depression. A lot of people go through like a depressive state. And then the final one is acceptance, and accepting your new normal. And grief, I think, is also associated to when we say about pain avoiders, is when it comes to change. Because I think there's a lot of people that want to live their best life, want to live their dream, through their true authentic self, but it is parting ways. Once you change and you start to claim the life that you want, you've got to let go of something.
Ooh, yeah.
And it's that letting go of the version or the story that you told yourself, or the beliefs that you've had about yourself, or the limitations you've put on yourself. It's letting go of all that. And sometimes as well, you're letting go of relationships. There's people that probably can't go to the level that you're wanting to go to. And so there's a lot of grief in changing on your own personal journey as well. There's a lot of things that are changing in your life that maybe you don't make sense of it until a little bit further down the line. It's like driving in a car and you can only see like the next 5 feet, and the headlights are there, and you know that you're on the right path, the right road, but you can only see so far ahead. And it's that like anticipation of like what's going to happen, the unknown, the unpredictability of that is what holds people in that fear.
I think it's then that moment of then carrying on down that journey of doing the work on yourself, because you've got to have that trust in yourself that you can navigate what's to come. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle on the journey, because they don't have that good relationship with themselves. And it's really comfortable and easy to hold on to this thing. Like the analogy I use with that is like you're holding on to this ball, this really battered old ball, and like let's use a football with two hands, and you're holding on to it, like, yeah, but I love this ball. And they're like, yeah, but mate, I've got this amazing new football for you. Like, it's so much better, and you've got to let go of that ball for me to pass you this new ball. But so many people are afraid and they don't trust themselves to catch this new ball and hold it. And I think for me, it's that, again, going back to what we talked about in childhood, like people just not having that relationship with themselves and trust in themselves, the self-confidence, self-esteem, whatever you want to call it, of actually being able to trust themselves to follow through with the stuff that they know they need to do. And that's where they're just like, oh, I'll just stick where I am. They don't really want to, but they almost like settle for themselves in their life.
And you know, one of the most important steps, one of the saddest things is a lot of people don't feel safe within themselves.
Yes.
And so again, going back to be able to regulate yourself, to provide that safety for yourself, will allow you to have the confidence and the clarity in where you're going. And a lot of people, again, stepping out of that comfort zone is like, what if I fail? What if I make those mistakes? What if I regret it? And not having that, again, that confidence, that trust in your own ability to claim what's yours. But just going back to self-belief as well, I use an analogy of like a bird in a tree. A bird's like sitting on a branch, but the bird's trust isn't in the branch or the tree, trust is in his wings. So it's again like, if this branch breaks, I'm fine because my trust is in my wings. And it's about developing that self-belief, that confidence and everything like that. And once you start to do the work on yourself, you start to understand your journey, you understand your childhood, you understand your behaviours, you understand how you're showing up in the world. That then gives you confidence because you've got complete clarity of who you are. And I think a lot of people, like if you was to say to somebody, can you describe who you are in 2 minutes? A lot of people are like, well, my name's Nathan, I'm 5'7", this is my job, this is my career, blah, blah, blah. We say all the surface level stuff, but like, who am I as an individual? What's my life's mission? What's my purpose? Why am I here? Yeah.
And that's where we get stuck. I love you say that.
And that's why you can't, and that's where people would find it hard to explain like who they are at the core.
My belief is that we're spiritual beings in a physical body with an intellect. That is when people talk about that. But like I said, they're very quick to talk about, well, I'm this tall, these are my attributes. Like, no, like, who actually are you? Like, just tell me like who you are. And again, you've got to know yourself. And it's I love you if I said that. That's a whole, I think we could talk about that for a whole hour. Let's just like loop it back around again, because we keep touching on this. But let's actually talk about like self-regulation. So I've mentioned this a lot. First of all, I love the fact you're a analogy person. I love analogies. I'm a very visual person. So the fact you've got analogies as well, I love this. And then I know when it comes to regulation, I know you're big on the ice baths, like I am as well. So that's great. Now we're not going to go and tell people to jump in ice baths, but what's the importance then of like this nervatory regulation? Like, why is this important? We've kind of touched on what happens when it's not working for us, and basically we're just kind of being reactive to life, we're just going down these paths. So why is it then important for us to actually get that regulation? Like, what else does it bring to us apart from like being able to be present? Like, what are the benefits of that?
Well, I think in order to be present, whether that's present for your partner, present for your children, present for yourself, and get complete clarity, I think we need to move out of dysregulation. And so,
what is that? Can we get like, what is dysregulation?
Dysregulated nervous system. So dysregulated nervous system is something that when you are going into that like fight or flight state,
that anxiety almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have a left brain, right brain. The left brain controls the right side of the body. The right brain controls the left side of the body. And again, going back to if we was hunter-gathering and we was foraging and we seen a tiger jump out of the bush, our left brain is really crucial in that moment to keep us safe. Okay, it's got all the evidence there. It's no good saying, Dan, let's go meditate for 30 seconds and regulate ourselves. Tiger's going to eat us, right? So the right brain is intuition, imagination, creativity. But it will send the information to the left brain. But if you're in a dysregulated nervous system, that left brain's the only one that's become dominant. That's the only one that's operating. So let's say if you are in a state of fight or flight, the left brain's activated. When people, and this is what shows up with clients. So if I get them to say a positive statement, so if I say, I want to be over this feeling of rejection. Now, if they stumble when they're making that statement, it means that there's an obstruction, there's a block. And often at times it's because their right brain, which is imagination, creativity, and intuition, isn't operating. So the two signs are if someone's stumbling over their words, which can happen, or they have brain fog, meaning that they're just in their left brain. And if you live in that state constantly, then that's not healthy, and you're obviously just ready to fight, flight, or often at times freeze as well. The right brain is important to be able to work and have the information transfer between both, because if you was to then move away from you've regulated your nervous system, you've got the tools, you've meditated, you've done breath work, whatever it may be that you find that helps, now you need to then step into your right brain and create a life that you want. That's really important. If people are just operating from their left brain, they're constantly hyper vigilant, hypersensitive to emotions, and constantly in this like perpetual state of like I said, fight or flight. So it's really important, just wanted to make that point, where when you are in a dysregulated nervous system, you're not thinking straight, you're literally operating on autopilot. And so it's very hard to make conscious decisions and be present, because anxiety, you're either in the future or in the past. Anxiety can't exist in the present moment, and that's another good another good indication of where you're at. Because if you feel anxious, if you feel worried or fearful, then it shows that you're not present. And so for an example, let's play a game. Okay, so there's a guy and he receives a letter in the post. Now this piece of paper has Bill on it, yeah, and so this guy receives a letter, and based on his evidence, life experience, he's probably had an experience in the past where this letter's brought him a negative feeling, right? So straight away he opens his letter, he sees Bill on it, straight away those chemicals are released. He's activated the amygdala, that's then activated the hippocampus, the chemicals released, because he's now feeling under threat. He feels there's a danger, okay, because his past experience says Bill equaled this, right? So he gets a letter, and then how we operate as humans, and how we're not taught this in schools, how to think effectively, we're taught what to think.
Yep.
So what we tend to do is we create a worst case scenario. So he gets the letter which says Bill on it, and now he plays out a movie in his head. So the next thought he has is, my house is going to get repossessed. Okay, so within that, it now becomes the script writer, because now he's writing the script to this story that he's making up. But this real to him in the moment, yeah, my house is going to get repossessed, I can't afford to pay.
He's thinking it, and the chemical reaction. So literally he's living it out like it has actually happened. Yep.
So all these chemicals are released, because again, your subconscious mind don't know what's real or imagined. So now he becomes the fantasizer. And then he starts to think about his wife. I'm going to be in the doghouse. My wife's going to be really angry with me. How am I going to tell her what I'm going to do? Mother-in-law, she's also going to be in on the act, because she lent us 10 grand to build an extension on the property. Now she can't move in with us. And now he's now envisioning going to court so he can picture a judge. And he's gone off on a tangent, right? And
but nothing's happened.
Nothing's happened. So take it back to the letter. If I was to hand this to my daughter, she would probably make a paper airplane out of it, right? Because she has to give that meaning. And she hasn't got the life experience or the pain or the experiences of what a Bill's brought her in her life. She's only 3. So in that moment, it's just a paper with ink on, right? But the meaning he's give it is worst case scenario. What he could say is, right, I've got this bill, I've got this letter. Okay, maybe lead to my house getting repossessed, but we want to downsize anyway. Yeah, and it means that mother-in-law can't move in with us. Result. Yeah.
Yeah.
But literally, the scenario that we're playing out is what we do naturally as humans. So we don't know how to think effectively. Okay, so this is happening on autopilot. We're unconscious the way that we think. The good news is, and the reassuring bit is that we are also the editor. So we can copy, we can paste, we can cut. And then we also become the projectionist. So what we can do in that moment is, when we realize that, we can understand that actually, if we're giving a situation a certain meaning, we can then go back and look at reframing it. What else could it mean? Another example is that there was a girl who was, when she was younger, she was at a house gathering. Her auntie came walking in and says, "Oh my God, sweetheart, aren't you getting big?" And so she's had to go inside her mind and give that meaning. And so the meaning that she gave it is, "Oh my God, I'm getting fat." but her auntie came in, she probably meant she's getting tall, right? But for 40 odd years now, she's got an eating disorder. It's affected her relationships, the most important relationship with herself. And so just based on the meaning that she's given that situation has obviously then dictated how her life's played out.
A lot of stuff that I've had to try and do with that is because that was my biggest thing, was getting stuck in negative thoughts patterns, just to spiral. Like I said, one thing leads to another, and like I said, worst case scenario, that was me to a T. Is whenever I see things now, I say that bill, let's say a letter comes through Bill, or I get a letter or something, a text message, it's not worse than a bill, because you kind of like, oh, you know, Nathan's text me, you click and you read it and it's bad news. Whereas at least with a bill, you kind of know what you're getting. So what I tend to do now is when I get these things, I will, as soon as I start to read, I start to notice a feeling that's coming up. I'll read it and I'm like, okay. And I'll just put it to one side. I'll go and do something and I'll come back to it. Because for me, if I then respond, it's a lot better than just reacting. Whereas normally reactive me, as you said, worst case scenario. So for me, how I learn myself to deal with situations is, okay, go away, come back and just look at the facts. What is this message actually saying to me? Not the story that I've attached to it. What is this saying to me? Saying that bill, you've read it through, but like, what is it actually saying? It's saying that you owe this money. Maybe you've got the money. Okay, cool. So you've gone this thing about losing your house. Okay, we've got the money or whatever it is. What's it actually saying? It's saying that you owe this amount of money. Cool. What does that then mean? Well, like factually in this moment, what does it mean? How can I deal with it? So that's how I've learned to deal with these situations, because I know what I'm like. If I read something, like sometimes Kate will say, oh, you got a text me. I'll look, I'm like, and I want to respond in a moment. Right, no, I'll go do something else, potentially meditate, depending on how bad it is. Calm myself down, I'll come back to it. So then that creative part of my mind can come back online and be like, okay, what does this mean? How are we going to deal with the situation? And I think we'll go back, let's go full circle. For when you're in an argument with your partner, that's what we don't tend to do. As I said, we just you sort of mentioned there, the creative, logical part goes out the brain, out the window. And we just back and forth, and no one's winning. You can see you're hurting each other. You don't want it. And it's almost like that moth that can't help but go into the light. You just keep doing it. You can't help yourself.
Even if you win that argument, you lose in the war anyway, because
100%.
if your partner's losing, you lose.
Yeah. 100%, mate, couldn't agree more with that. So how do we, as you mentioned there about some what can we actually do then to sort of regulate? So let's say people listen to this, especially not necessarily young people, but people listening to this will probably know a young person. So let's just not just specifically talk to young people, but do struggle with this anxiety, depression, all that sort of stuff, like dysregulated nervous system stuff. What's some stuff that they can do to just sort of in the moment right now? Is anything you sort of mentioned, is meditation you kind of go to, do you do with people? Like how do we get ourselves back to that just calm centered state so that creative state can sort of kick in? Like what's some sort of tips and tricks you give people?
I think you have to go there safely, and I think when it comes to like therapeutic tools, some methods and techniques that I provide for clients, I think there's layers to it. So I think if they've not had any experience of meditation, or that again they don't feel safe within themselves to go inwardly, then of course there's I'd probably start with exercises, journaling, asking deep meaningful questions to answer, again reframing what is the situation that's playing out for you, what's your beliefs around this situation. Start kind of surface level. But if people have had experience of going to meditation, they feel like, you know, whether that's a retreat or whether they've just experienced meditation in general, and they feel safe enough to then do the work, then yeah, there's things like meditation. Eye gazing is a really powerful one. I mean, you'll be surprised how many clients I work with who just don't feel safe looking at themselves in the mirror.
Did you literally just stare at yourself in the mirror?
I provide statements that they say to themselves. Affirmations, yep. But it's getting them to actually feel safe to look at themselves. And going back to it, and I think you've mentioned it, but the younger parts of yourself, if you are a people pleaser, if you are somebody that has kind of lived your life for other people, or maybe you've been manipulated to meet other people's needs, and you basically say no to the younger parts of yourself, you are neglecting yourself. So if you're born into a family, born into nationality, born into race, born into religion, that's all out of your control. You're with these big people and you're relying on them to regulate you. There comes a time in your life when you actually take the steering wheel and you are old enough to be able to retain information, to learn about all this stuff, and then to also be able to take essentially the power back. But I think the saddest part I see is how we don't treat those younger parts of ourselves like we would other people. Like those younger parts of ourselves need our attention, need to be celebrated, need to be acknowledged, need to be seen. And this eye gazing in the mirror is about repairing that relationship with those younger parts of yourself. There's so many things that I do in terms of connecting with your inner child and repairing that. Another one is where allow the person instinctively to go where they want in terms of like meditation, but go to a safe place, somewhere where they feel safe, and then visualize the younger versions of themselves. So the young person who was abused, the young person that was rejected or neglected or whatever it was, and see yourself holding that young person, that younger part of yourself. It's amazing what it can do in terms of repairing that relationship. And it's so freeing and liberating when you can do that, because you could be waiting your whole life for your mother, your father, the guy, the girl, that whoever has brought negative feelings and experiences to your life, or people aren't meeting those needs. But when you start to meet your own needs through those practices, it's so liberating and freeing for people.
I remember the first time I meditated and told myself I love myself. So it wasn't the first time I meditated, but the first time I'd actually said to myself, I love myself, and I burst out crying. It was the most surreal experience. I just, off the cuff, I was meditating, and I just thought, then affirmations, and I thought, I love myself. What I said, I love you, or I love me. I said, it was weird. So it wasn't comfortable, because something that's one of my biggest things is, one of the biggest things for me was validation. So I always had to seek validation, which was such a problem with women. Because whenever anyone showed attention to me, I was like, wow, you see me. And I didn't know how to reciprocate that apart from, let's just have sex. That was the only way that I knew to, for someone, that was one of my biggest issues. So just someone saying that they're proud of me. That was one of the biggest things for me. So again, I've had to do a lot of work on actually recognize myself and saying, I'm proud of me. And still to this day, when someone says, actually yesterday, someone said about my podcast and said, wow, like, honestly, I told you, just go,
For so many guys.
exactly. And it's, for me, and I'm very open and honest talking about it, but even someone yesterday said about the podcast, said, I'm so proud of you and how far it's gone. You should be proud of yourself. And I just had to sit for a second and be like, well, I need to accept this. Like, I'm accepting this compliment because it's what I wanted. I want someone to say they're proud of me. But then when it comes around, it's like, how do I receive that? And I should look back at all the relationship I had in the past of just pushing women away. And it's because whenever anyone showed me love, I did not love myself. So whenever anyone showed it me, I didn't know how to deal with it. So I just had to push them away because it felt so uncomfortable. So talk on that, because you said I'm glad I spoke about it. So let's just riff on that then.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that absolutely. And it's almost like you're craving that connection, but when intimacy comes,
yeah,
it's like this again, just avoiding and keeping at arm's length. But again, that just comes down to, again, your nervous system not feeling safe and being able to regulate yourself. But yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because I think that plays out for so many guys. When it comes to relationships, again, repeated patterns. And also they say about as well, you choose people, and talking partnerships now, you choose people based on kind of like the caregivers, like similar attributes, similar traits. So you, unconsciously, you kind of choose people. And I think I mentioned this in a post as well. Something that I had to realize is that, like, I used to say to myself, like, why am I attracting drama? Yep. Why am I attracting chaos?
Yep.
I was actually creating it.
Yep.
I was creating it because a dysregulated nervous system allows me to have drama in my life, to be able to then release this energy.
And I bet you knew how to deal with drama as well. Because with your mum, it's kind of drama you never get. So if drama, right, drama comes about, I know how to deal with this. Whereas if it's a nice, safe, loving relationship, you don't have a script for that. You don't have a clue. So like, right, I need to sort of mess this up a bit. And I think it's really interesting. I look back at it, I used to blame, God, I used to have some right nutters. No, I used to pick these people and try and fix them to make myself feel better, because all I wanted was to fix myself. But I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm struggling.
I've seen one of your videos. You're talking about frequency, right? So if you're on Classic FM and you're trying to get to a different radio station, then you've got to then plug into that radio station. So like attracts like, doesn't it? So if your nervous system is dysregulated and you're used to chaos or operating in chaos and drama, then of course you're going to attract that. A lot of the time we're on the surface, we're like, oh my God, I'm always choosing the wrong guy or the wrong girl, or in this job, and it's all them and you're victim to all of this. I think again, it plays out, doesn't it, where once you start to realize that those patterns and kind of what your role is in all of that, everything can change. And I always say to clients as well that, yes, I'm here to hold your hand. I'm here side by side, and I will adopt that compassionate listening and we'll walk through the information stage. But to then go from information to transformation, you have to participate in your own rescue. Like there's action that you need to take. And again, it's like information is not enough when you are dysregulated. You have to put in the tools, implement them in order to, and you've got to put it to use. Otherwise, nothing's going to change.
I think you had a good point there. You basically you can't do the work for people, and the sort of us in the coaching relationships, like I will go 50%. It's got to be 50-50. I will literally go, I'll give you everything for that 50, but you have to meet me halfway. Like I can't come into that zone for you. Like I can give you all the tools, but you have to keep to your side of the bargain. And if you're not into that, exactly. And I think how uncomfortable is it as well when you realise that you're the cause of all your issues in life. I mean, when I first realised all this drama I had in my life and these ex-girlfriends, I was like, well, this is uncomfortable because I've done it to myself, and it's not a nice feeling. But then at the same time, it's very empowering because, and I say this when I'm in schools, like no one's coming to save you. No one can save you. You're the only person. So once you actually realise, yes, you've caused all this, but then you are the person that can also fix it and change it. It's really powerful. But I think people, why do you think, to wrap this up here, like, because I could talk to you for hours, but I told you to go on tangents here. Why do you think people aren't taught this information? Because this is what frustrates me. I don't know if you get when you go into schools. The information is out there. We could easily teach these kids how to control thoughts, how to change narratives, how to unpick belief systems, create their own future. Why do you think we're not taught this?
I think it comes back down to the people feeling safe. So let's say you're a head teacher or a teacher and you know that how to motivate change in an individual, but if you haven't been to those places within yourself, or you're not vulnerable enough to go there, then it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to disrupt, or I don't want to disturb somebody and bring that up for them. It's almost like emotions just seem to be like, oh no, don't allow them to cry. I see it in the high street. Parents will be like, trying to cut the child off from crying because it's embarrassing me, or allow the whole thing to complete itself. A child expresses itself through emotion. And so when we stop, we bring the feelings back to us, don't we? So we're like, oh, well, actually, you need to cry because we're in public and I feel this way. And so we're not comfortable. I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but we're not comfortable with emotions. We're not comfortable seeing people process emotions. And I think that's because, if we're regulated and we have a secure attachment, then I think that we hold the space and we're open and vulnerable enough to go to those depths. And I think that's where it kind of stems from, because then people need to feel safe enough to go there.
Yeah, I love that. I also think as guys as well, the word vulnerability extracts fear into the heart of guys, thinking it shows weakness and all that sort of stuff. And I think there's a common misconception about that. I say to people all the time, like, once you can figure yourself out and go into the darkest parts of yourself and rummage around and come out the other side, that takes real strength. That's one of the hardest things that you'll ever do, and that shows strength. That's not weakness. To actually know your vulnerabilities, that means you've gone through some stuff. You've gone through some dark things and come out the other side. That's real strength, because no one can beat you up and torment you as much as you do inside your own head. So when you come out the other side and show that vulnerability, that's someone that's really done the work on themselves and has been to that dark place. And it's like, wow, that person's got some real strength. Final point to wrap this up. I'm definitely going to have you back on, by the way, because I said we've just opened up a can of worms. I'm like, we could have gone all over the shop with this thing about masculinity and emotions and stuff like that. I'd like to ask my guest, final question is, so what advice would you give to someone who's listening to this right now? And we've covered a lot of stuff. We've given a lot of information. So either to summarise or give another bit of advice. What advice would you give someone right now that's listening to this and does feel stuck and out of control of their life?
I'm really optimistic that change can happen, and change can happen really quickly if you're willing to do the work. And I love the quote by Peter Levine where he says, you're never too old to have the childhood you deserve.
Ooh.
And so I feel like when it comes to giving people advice, is that what I would say, and this is a really powerful statement, when I work with clients, often they think we're having emotions, and I put it to them, you're doing emotions. And I think that changes everything, because if you're doing it, then you can look at how you're doing it, and if you are doing the emotion, you can change the emotion. A lot of the time we feel victim and powerless when we are having emotions, because it's the outside world that are dictating the way we feel. When you are doing emotions, it's scientifically provable, we do emotions, then we can change it. So if you're willing to do the work, which is painful, which is uncomfortable, but if you can find someone that you feel safe and comfortable with to assist you and guide you through that process safely, then you don't underestimate how quickly you can get the life you deserve.
I love you said that again when I first heard that as well. Like, it's like a light bulb moment. You're doing emotions. Again, people can get very upset by that. What do you mean? Because again, it's like, oh no, it's this person.
Well,
no,
I'm contributing towards everything that I feel.
Yeah, it's so again, massive light bulb for people. Nathan, this genuinely has been amazing. We could have gone for another hour.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Where can people find out more information about you? If they want to connect with you, if they want to reach out, where's the best way of contacting you?
Yeah, so my website, www.nathanarnoldcoaching.com. Instagram's Nathan Arnold Coaching. And my email's nathanarnoldcoaching@hotmail.com.
I mean, honestly, like I say, thank you very much for taking time to come down here and again give some real value and insight to the audience, which was the whole point of this. And I said you've definitely fulfilled that. So I look forward to catching with you again, because that's where we definitely have to go again. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.